Good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be here once again. I love this group and I enjoy sharing ideas with people who really want to protect our environment, our wildlife, and the people who also inhabit this earth, especially the poorest among us. Doctors for Disaster Preparedness has an important mission: being ready to address whatever calamities befall us, whether they're human or natural in origin. But how do you prepare for and respond to crises that are 24/7, 365? Disasters that are a direct and even deliberate result of laws and policies advanced and imposed by activist pressure and government edict. Disasters that are perpetuated and worsened by official laws and policies. Malaria, for example, continues to kill up to 1 million children and parents every year. We could control and even eradicate it by including larvicides, insecticides, and the powerful insect repellent DDT in truly comprehensive malaria control programs that also include bed nets and artemisinin-based combination drugs. But chemophobic eco-imperialists continue to battle these life-saving chemicals. They promote bogus scare stories about them and do all they can to keep poor countries from using these chemicals, even after the World Health Organization and U.S. Agency for International Development finally approved them. Malnutrition and starvation continue to exact a horrific toll year after year. Modern farming methods, chemical fertilizers, and biotechnology could increase crop yields and improve nutrition all over the world. But the same ecological ideologues battle these technologies tooth and nail and promote organic subsistence farming. Radical Greens also employ the precautionary principle, sustainable development, agenda-driven corporate ethics guidelines, and numerous other tactics to keep people from having the technologies, the health, and living standards that we enjoy here. Lung and intestinal diseases kill millions more people every year. 2 million in Africa alone. Just bringing electricity to poor countries and villages would slash these unconscionable death tolls by replacing open fires with modern heating and cooking technologies and ensuring sanitation and safe drinking water. In fact, energy is the master resource. Energy improves, safeguards, and enriches our lives. It is the foundation for everything we have and everything we make, grow, transport, and do. Energy transforms our inalienable and constitutionally protected rights into rights and opportunities we actually enjoy, including jobs, homes, food, travel, health care, and the pursuit of happiness. With abundant, affordable, reliable energy, almost anything is possible. Without it, opportunity, progress, job creation, health, and human rights are hobbled. But in the perverse world of eco-imperialists, abundant, reliable, affordable energy is bad. It turns third world beggars and subsistence farmers into middle-class consumers. And meeting their newfound needs would mean taking more resources out of the ground, and that hurts the earth. That's their logic. Abundant, reliable, affordable energy is like giving an idiot child a machine gun, says the great humanitarian Paul Ehrlich. It means too many people live and human populations remain at unsustainable levels. So they attack energy viciously and mindlessly. Nuclear power is dangerous, a potential disaster, they insist. Hydroelectric power dams up rivers that want to run wild and free. Hydrocarbons, or fossil fuels, mean drilling holes in Mother Gaia, they shriek. You need drilling fluids, offshore platforms, pipelines, and refineries. You get spills and pollution. You use it to fuel cars. So they use wilderness, refuge, and 100 other land use designations to make lands off limits to oil, gas, coal, and uranium development. They battle leasing, drilling, mining, and power plants on any lands that aren't actually off limits. But most of all now, they use fears of catastrophic global warming to obstruct access to hydrocarbons. And the reason is obvious. As MIT professor and meteorologist Dick Lindzen says, if you control carbon, you control life. Global warming laws, therefore, give politicians and activists power to control the power we rely on, power to control our lives, health, progress, and human rights. In developed countries, laws and policies that restrict access to energy drive up the price of fuel and electricity. They force people and businesses to use less. They reduce living standards, force employers to cut wages or lay off workers, and leave families struggling as the cost of everything goes higher. Reducing U.S. carbon dioxide emissions by 83% below 2005 levels as required by the just-passed Waxman-Markey legislation in the House would send America's emissions back to levels last seen in 1908. Back to 1868 levels if you account for changes in U.S. population and technology since 1908. And to get there, somebody other than you, is going to decide what kinds of energy people can use and how much, what kind of car you can drive and how far, what kind of home you can have and how warm or cool you can keep it, how many energy-intensive Google searches you can do in a year, what kind of food you can have and at what price, where it can come from, where you can go on vacation, what kind of industries and jobs will be created, hobbled, or destroyed. And of course, you'll get to decide how to pay these skyrocketing costs for energy, food, and everything else, whether to take the money out of your church and charity budget, for example, or out of your health care and clothing budget, or out of your college retirement and vacation savings. And your bosses will get to decide how they will pay their skyrocketing energy costs, how many people to fire or furlough, perhaps, or what kind of salary and health care rollbacks to impose, assuming we're not on Obamacare and politicians and bureaucrats are not decreeing our health care rollbacks. Churches, hospitals, schools, cities, and states will also get to decide which services to cut back, just as more families are facing more and more dire circumstances. And to enforce it all, to make sure you're not using more than your fair share of energy or conserving less than you ought to or emitting more CO2 than you should, there will be an important new agency, the Federal Bureau of Climate Investigation, the Climate Cops. You think it's far-fetched? Well, have you read the 1,400-page House Global Warming Bill to see what restrictions, penalties, and juicy special deals for lobbyists are buried in it? How many guidelines, mandates, and subsidies? How many provisions for ways to make sure we get to an 83% reduction? Well, maybe you can ask your senator or congressman what's in it, or in the various Senate versions, or ask President Obama. I'm sure they've all read it very carefully, though not as carefully as they will expect you to read it and understand it once they've passed it and jammed its various regulations down our collective throats. Here's one other example. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission already wants to force companies to assess how their products, services, and actions might cause speculative climate change. This provision is almost certain to drive up costs, take products off the market, and give activists and lawyers wonderful new opportunities for litigation and blackmail. And of course, there's no companion measure to compel companies to assess how global warming prevention actions and legislation will affect families' living standards, jobs, or health and human welfare. And over in Britain, some very interesting things have been going on. Almost a quarter of the population has now been driven into fuel poverty, according to recent reports. That means by the time they pay their heating and cooling and fuel costs, they have nothing left for other activities. Climate ministers there have even proposed to embed carbon tracking data in charge cards so that they can ensure people don't purchase more gasoline or take more airline trips than they should in a year. And British energy company npower has a Climate Cops campaign to get kids to report on climate crimes. What's a climate crime? Well, here are some of npower's helpful suggestions. Leaving the TV on standby. Using a clothes dryer on a sunny day. not using mercury-enhanced compact fluorescent light bulbs, leaving a cell phone charger plugged in, letting the water run while brushing your teeth, taking a hot bath instead of a quick, maybe cold shower, leaving the lights on. NPower even provides handy forms on its website so your kids can write you a citation. And when they're done at home, NPower suggests that they go and visit their neighbors and your relatives. It's really patriotic. I can just see it now, a statue right outside the hotel here, memorializing the new hero to the motherland, or Mother Earth. The climate equivalent of Pavlik Morozov, the 12-year-old Russian boy who ratted on his father for concealing grain and was memorialized in Soviet bronze. But there is good news as well. We're not going to be deprived of energy. We will have wind and solar power. In fact, we'll have so much renewable energy that we'll have beautiful new national forests composed of wind turbines, solar panels, and transmission lines made of steel, concrete, copper, fiberglass, and exotic minerals all over America. A single 1.5 megawatt GE wind turbine requires 700 tons of these raw materials, and the United States will need 180,000 towering turbines by 2020 just to generate the 600 billion kilowatt hours of carbon-free electricity that we'll need to comply with the Waxman-Markey bill. That translates into 18,000 new turbines every year, and 126 million tons of raw materials, plus millions of acres of agricultural and habitat land, just for the turbines, plus prodigious additional quantities of these lands and resources for the transmission lines, and still more for backup gas-fired generators. So, either the environmentalists are going to ignore all the environmental study and endangered species and NEPA and other laws that they have used for years very successfully to block fossil fuel and nuclear projects, and they're going to instead fast track all these approvals for wind and solar power, or else they, or at least segments of the environmentalist community, will enforce those laws. And the wind and solar projects will be obstructed for years, and we won't have fossil fuel, nuclear, or renewable energy. And instead we'll have a massive energy gap between what we need and what we actually have to power our civilization. But assuming that wind and solar power do eventually move forward, all those people who will be mining and drilling for the raw materials and turning them into turbines and transmission towers and installing them in Cape Cod, and that's a joke, obviously, but Texas and the Midwest, are suddenly going to have green jobs because those materials will be for green energy, just as President Obama has promised. Well, at least the installers will have those green jobs, and so will the lawyers and surveyors who will be handling the eminent domain land grabs. My, that's a nice piece of property you've got there. It's perfect for a transmission line. It would be a real shame if we had to take it because you're just too stubborn to sell it at a fair price, of course, when we ask you real nice like. And we're going to see a lot of that, I'm afraid, because we're going to need transmission lines and thousands of miles of those and thousands of square miles eventually of wind and solar and other renewable properties. And the other jobs for the mining and so forth will be in China and India most likely, because we're just not that into having dirty quarries, mines, and oil wells and factories here in America anymore. So that's the situation in terms of stateside. We're going to end up importing not just our oil and gas, but our renewable energy infrastructure. Now, how's climate change looking overseas in the third world? For poor developing countries, the situation is infinitely worse, and there's no surprise there. In those countries, restricting access to energy means families must continue living indigenous lifestyles, enjoying indigenous poverty, indigenous malnutrition, indigenous disease, and childhood death, to quote my friend Juna Runga from Kenya. And rich country tourists can visit them on human game preserves, says South African human rights activist Leon Lowe. These nations, communities, families, and individuals should be free to chart their own destinies, it seems to me, free to select policies and technologies that will help them achieve their goal of a better life for themselves and their children, free to retain the best of their cultures and traditions and modify what they wish as they move forward, the same way we have always done and the same way we're still doing. They should not be held back by eco-imperialists who think they have a right to dictate how, when, how much, or even if poor nations should develop. But eco-activists are doing exactly that, using sophisticated, hard-hitting pressure campaigns against governments, aid agencies, banks, companies, and poor countries. They prevaricate, legislate, regulate, litigate, and mandate what people can and cannot do. They retaliate against any who oppose them. They deprive destitute people of the blessings that wealthy nations and the eco-activists themselves enjoy, while doing precious little to safeguard the environmental values we all cherish. Today, in India, 400 million people still do not have electricity. In China, 500 million do not. In sub-Saharan Africa, almost 750 million people are still without electricity. And no electricity means no refrigeration to keep food and medicines from spoiling. It means no water purification to further reduce baby-killing intestinal diseases. It means no modern heating or air conditioning to reduce hypothermia in the winter, heat stroke in the summer, and lung diseases year-round. It means no lights or computers, no modern offices, factories, schools, shops, clinics, or hospitals. When the sun goes down, their lives shut down. And dreams of healthier, more prosperous lives remain just that, dreams. And yet over and over, environmentalists, rich country politicians, and the United Nations are telling African and other impoverished nations that the greatest threat facing them today is climate change, caused by the very energy technologies that would most improve and safeguard their lives. Just a few months ago, Cameroon hosted 7 senior British members of Parliament who claimed climate change threatens humanity more than HIV/AIDS. And in nearby Chad, as Mark Morano and a couple of other people have pointed out, the government banned the manufacture, use, and importation of charcoal, the sole source of fuel for 99% of Chadians. Cooking is a fundamental necessity for every household, its environmental minister intoned. But with climate change, every citizen must protect his environment. The edict sent women and children scavenging for food, animal dung, grass, and anything else that burns. And I presume the environmental minister simply decreed that those fuels don't emit greenhouse gases. People cannot cook, human rights activists cried. Women giving birth cannot even find a scrap of charcoal to heat water for washing. And when citizens took to the streets in protest, the police beat them and violently dispersed them. We will not give up, a women's group leader said. It is better to die swiftly than to continue dying slowly. 1/4 of all the world's deaths are due to easily curable and treatable diseases. It's the equivalent of the population of Florida wiped off the map every year, says Bjorn Lomborg. For example, for each person hypothetically saved from malaria by cutting CO2 emissions, direct malaria policies could actually save 36,000 lives. So, the poverty, disease, and death toll continues to mount, not from global warming, but from policies imposed in the name of preventing global warming Armageddon. What evidence do the climate alarmists have to support their dire predictions of planetary mayhem? To counter the facts, data, and analyses you heard yesterday and earlier this morning? What evidence do they have to back up claims that they can set the world's thermostat, keep temperatures from rising 2 degrees Celsius, and prevent storms, droughts, and other planetary processes? What evidence do they have to support the evil, depraved policies that impoverish, sicken, and kill countless millions every year? Their attitude is right out of The Treasure of the Sierra Madres. We're federales, you know, climate police. Evidence?
We don't got no evidence. We don't need no evidence. We don't have to show you no stinking evidence.
Thank you. Instead of evidence, they speculate, hypothesize, assume, assert, and decree that carbon dioxide causes climate change and that any climate change is going to be disastrous. They issue press releases, hockey sticks, and good old boy peer-reviewed reports that tie every weather, temperature, and wildlife aberration to human-caused climate change due to human emissions of carbon dioxide. They use computers to conjure up terrifying worst-case scenarios, special effects, and Hollywood disaster movies. What if the Antarctic melted and sea levels rose 15 meters? It would be nearly impossible to adapt to those changes, a Gambian environment minister solemnly intoned during a recent UN-sponsored dialogue on climate change. And I'm sure he's right. Adapting to a 50-foot sea level rise would be a challenge. But the dialogue didn't mention the rather slim likelihood that rising CO2 levels will overturn basic laws of thermodynamics. The average temperature in Antarctica is minus 58 below 0 Fahrenheit. And during its miserly 2-month summer, the Western Peninsula averages 4 degrees above freezing. There's thus a sub-zero probability that runaway warming will raise Antarctic temperatures 95 degrees, from minus 58 to plus 37. 24/7, 365 for a century or more, so as to melt some 200,000 cubic miles of South Pole ice. But the evidence, these little inconvenient truths about temperatures and thermodynamics, would get in the way of a good horror story. So they conveniently just don't get mentioned by Al Gore, James Hansen, President Obama, or the compliant media. But what if the Arctic and Antarctic did melt? What if sea levels did go up 50 meters? What if hurricanes and tornadoes did reach day after tomorrow proportions? Well, that's why computer models are so important. Put in some speculation, some assumptions, some random data and facts, little eye of newt, and piecemeal understanding of climate and weather systems, and voila, out comes a raft of scary scenarios. All peer-reviewed, of course, by carefully selected peers, and all perfect for headlines, congressional hearings, UN confabs, and Scott Pelley CBS specials. 700 climate scientists openly challenge IPCC claims of a looming climate disaster. 31,000 scientists signed the Oregon petition and say there is no evidence that humans are disrupting the climate or causing a global warming disaster. 2/3 of Americans oppose cap and tax legislation. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all that the Waxman-Markey economic pain, job losses, and intrusive government control of our lives will only reduce projected global average temperatures by 2050 by a lousy, irrelevant, imperceptible 0.1 degrees. And that's largely because 97% of the projected increase in CO2 emissions between now and 2030 will come from the developing world, according to the International Energy Agency. And 3/4 of that will come from China and India alone. It doesn't matter to Congress, the White House, and the UN because instead of corporate shills and bogus climate experts with fancy schmancy PhDs, people like Gray and Soon and Legates and Keene, Singer, people like that, the alarmists have real experts. They've got astronomer, alarmist-in-chief, and Teresa Heinz Kerry grant recipient James Hansen, railroad engineer and economist Rajendra Pachauri, social worker Ivo Tibor, polar bear expert, high school graduate, and ER surgeon Noah Wiley. They've got the Begleys, Newsweek climate disaster expert Sharon Begley, and high school graduate Ed Begley Jr., who advocates little solar panels on African huts. They have community activist Barack Obama, the Greens man in the White House. You have high school dropouts, Leonardo DiCaprio, Lindsay Lohan, and Paris Hilton, all of whom happily and hypocritically support Al Gore. Al Gore got a C in one college science course and a D in the only other one he ever took. But he knows how to entertain and terrify people, avoid debate and inconvenient questions, and rake in millions of dollars a year. As they say, the difference between fact and fiction is that fiction has to make sense, or nobody will believe it. Or as young Alice Liddell told the Cheshire Cat, "I don't want to go among mad people." "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" Alice protested. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." So how did we get here, to this bizarre through-the-world looking glass of man-made climate disasters? Well, simply put, what the climate Armageddonites lack in facts and science, they more than make up for elsewhere. They have an agenda, not so much to control the climate, but to control our energy use, our lives, and our economic development, our populations and resource consumption, to save the planet from man-made warming, regardless of what that does to create and perpetuate poverty, disease, misery, and death. They have Hollywood style and hubris. They're convinced that they can control the Earth's climate, that they're smarter than the rest of us, and that they should be in charge. The alarmists also have the IPCC Charter. It says this august scientific body is to assess and understand the risks of human-induced climate change. Now, initially, this language simply helped the IPCC focus on the human aspects of complex climate change processes that most scholars once recognized were driven primarily, or at least significantly, by the same powerful natural forces that caused the ice ages, the interglacial periods, the Roman and medieval warm periods, the Dust Bowl, and countless other climate events throughout history. But that was rather inconvenient for those who thought mankind and carbon emissions were the culprits and wanted to blame them, those who wanted to control carbon and life. So the Charter was gradually reinterpreted to exclude or dismiss non-human natural causes and emphasize only the human causes as highly likely sources of measured, perceived, speculated, and exaggerated warming and climate crises. And not surprisingly, that revised charter has helped monumentally by another big advantage that alarmists enjoy. They have money, boatloads of money. As Australian science educator Joanne Nova, who wrote this report that you can get outside there, has noted in a very recent report just issued days ago, the U.S. government alone has spent over $79 billion in taxpayer money since 1989 on climate change science and technology research, propaganda campaigns, foreign aid, tax breaks, and conjuring up worst-case computer scenarios. Almost all of it to back up the assumption that human CO2 emissions are causing a global warming catastrophe. That is 3,400 times more money than ExxonMobil gave to climate crisis skeptics over the same 20-year period, and for which the company and its recipients have been viciously attacked by the very alarmists who have been feeding at the $79 billion government trough. My question is, if $23 million can corrupt otherwise honest researchers, just imagine what $79 billion can do. More about that in a moment. And don't forget, this $79 billion does not include the tens of billions that the EU, UN, Canada, Australia, left-leaning foundations, rent-seeking corporations, and others have also contributed to global warming alarmism and technology research, propaganda campaigns, and worst-case computer conjuring. All this money has brought us to where we are today, to what might aptly be called the activist political industrial complex. And some of that's addressed in this issue of American Conservative, the green industrial complex. I add the political element. It's a powerful coalition, allied in support of three things. Number one, blaming modern technologies and living standards for asserted climate change disasters. Two, seeking a radical transformation of civilization, technologies, lifestyles, and human behavior by eliminating hydrocarbons, sending energy prices upward into the stratosphere, and controlling access to energy. Three, justifying the eventual expenditure of trillions of taxpayer dollars and consumer dollars on research, education, agitation, international conferences, green technologies and jobs, carbon capture, storage, and offsets, and political solutions that channel still more money, power, and control toward members of the coalition. In the United States, the principal coalition is the U.S. Climate Action Partnership. U.S. CAP and its analogs in virtually every country are composed of environmental activist groups and energy, technology, and financial service companies, and supported by scientists, bureaucrats, politicians, and journalists. They operate in an arena where billions and even trillions of dollars are on the table, and energy and economic futures are at stake. Membership confers valuable benefits. Environmental activist groups gain power, influence, prestige, donations, and major grants from foundations, corporations, and government agencies to advance their ideological agenda. Catastrophic global warming also provides a welcome alternative explanation for the unconscionable disease, malnutrition, poverty, and death rates in third world countries. It deflects blame for the eco-imperialist callous opposition to energy and economic development, biotechnology, and insecticides, and for the pain, suffering, poverty, disease, and death that their crusades continue to impose on the world's least fortunate people. Energy, technology, and financial companies get seats at the negotiating table, where decisions are made regarding laws, regulations, taxes, mandates, subsidies, penalties, preferences, and opportunities to game the system, hobble competitors, and create complex new carbon offset and asset markets. Companies also receive accolades for being green and socially responsible, and get muted criticism for their transgressions. Farmers and agribusiness conglomerates get mandates and subsidies for ethanol. They get carbon offset payments for sequestering carbon dioxide simply by planting crops. And under the Waxman-Markey bill, they get what might be described as tax-free super IRA packages for simply letting their land go fallow and return back to forests when they retire. And they're going to get payments for those. Scientists and bureaucrats obtain million-dollar grants, build reputations, careers, fiefdoms, and power. They travel to exotic locales on expense accounts, receive plaudits for being on the leading edge of planet-saving research, discoveries, and solutions, so long as they refrain from issuing statements and reports that question or contest human-caused climate catastrophe hypotheses. Universities, as part of all of this, often get to take about 40 or 50% off the top from these grants when the grants are awarded to faculty members, since there's a lot of money available for climate cataclysm research, but not much for skepticism or climate change's natural research. It's not surprising that many deans and faculties are mostly in the alarmist camp, or that they would lambaste and even threaten climate skeptics or try to quiet them down by giving them new programs built on more politically correct themes like sustainability. Politicians, of course, they get to champion legislation, choose winners and losers in technology and economic battles, control energy policy and use, hobnob with Hollywood media, corporate, and other celebrities, and achieve star status for themselves. They also get trillions of dollars in new tax revenues extracted from families and businesses, energy consumers, so that they can dole it out to their favorite voting blocs. They also build seniority, powerful alliances, campaign war chests, and armies of eco-activists campaign help. That ensures them longevity in office, far better health care packages than they're likely to vote for us mere commoners under the U.S. version of Canada Care or Brit Care, and retirement packages that Croesus would envy. Journalists and media outlets become more than mere observers and reporters of sagas about heroes and villains and looming catastrophes. By promoting alarmist speculation and research and ignoring contradictory evidence and crisis skeptics, they become active partners in unfolding dramas. They become kingmakers and king breakers and self-fulfilling prophesiers of technologies, ideologies, purported solutions, and favored industries. Overseas, leaders of Earth's most impoverished nations become active advocates of sea level and climate crisis speculation, and thus conduits of climate change foreign aid, with large-bore pipelines channeling prodigious conference management and sustainable development fees to private bank accounts. Indeed, some of the climate Armageddon players are going to get rich, even filthy rich. Al Gore, it's said, could become the world's first climate billionaire. As I said earlier, if 23 billion can corrupt, just imagine what 79 billion can do, and that's just for starters. Now, I'm by no means suggesting that all crisis-oriented scientists have been corrupted by support from the $79 billion grant machine, but the temptation, the pressure, and the intimidation are great, and the unintended consequences of their constant drumbeat of global doom are certainly enormous. For while some are financing careers and padding bank accounts, most people, families, companies, and countries will get the shaft. Some needy families will indeed receive subsistence-level energy welfare, courtesy of tax-paying families and energy-consuming businesses. But mostly the poor and powerless will get marginalized, ignored, left behind, and sacrificed in the great cause of promoting sustainable development and climate crisis prevention. Unfortunately, those who seek climate crisis riches and power are already well organized and have big bucks to promote their cause. The rest of us have limited power and money and political clout, and we remain likely to get branded and vilified as climate criminals, warming Holocaust deniers, and traitors to the planet. It's a brilliant strategy the climate Armageddonites have devised, if also diabolical and even evil. However, we do have a few things going for us that Al Gore and the eco-imperialists don't have. We have real science, fact-based economics, and humanitarian morality on our side. We have dedicated, caring people like those in this room to carry the message of hope and progress far and wide to take on the eco-imperialists. We have millions of people who may not have fancy degrees, but certainly have dirt under their fingernails common sense. We have billions more in China, India, Brazil, Vietnam, Russia, Uganda, South Africa, and dozens of other countries who want better lives, modern technologies, and living standards, and some of the stuff, the middle-class gadgets that we enjoy. They haven't bought into the climate cataclysm and cap-and-trade nonsense yet, despite the billions that have been spent propagandizing those themes. And I'm not sure they ever will. So here's what we need to do to carry the day and keep the activist political industrial complex from rationing our energy, controlling our lives, and rolling back progress, health, and civil rights. Use speeches, articles, journal papers, op-eds, letters to the editor, call-ins to radio stations, and other opportunities to question and educate citizens and legislators. Go to events where you can embarrass legislators, climate activists, and corporate rent seekers in public. That's critical. Congress is heading home for its recess, its August recess, to have town meetings with its constituents. It's a perfect time to ask them some tough questions. to let them know what's on your mind and tell them how angry you are about the way they are ramming these partisan bills through Congress without reading or understanding them to totally transform our country, regardless of what the bills do to families, jobs, businesses, lands, property rights, and habitats. And all that for a miserly 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit reduction in global average temperatures over the next 40 years. Pound especially on the poverty, misery, disease, and death that energy rationing schemes are having on families, especially darker-skinned families in poor communities and countries. Demand real evidence, solid proof, to back up claims that people and carbon dioxide cause climate change, that any change will be disastrous, and that humans can control the Earth's thermostat and climate. Computer models are not evidence. Demand real evidence, real proof. Ask them to explain how carbon dioxide emissions have suddenly overturned the laws of thermodynamics and replaced the powerful natural forces that obviously caused repeated climate changes throughout history. Take the battle to the third world. Encourage people to stand up to the UN and other eco-imperialists who want to use global warming fear-mongering to justify pernicious policies that impoverish, sicken, and kill people. Billions of people in these countries still do not have electricity. They want and they deserve to take their rightful places among the Earth's healthy and prosperous people. Let's all help them get there. Remind people everywhere that Al Gore and his Hollywood political activist and business buddies have the biggest carbon butt prints on the planet. They like to tell us low-life commoners what to do and how to live our lives, but they sure aren't about to trade in their lofty lifestyles for our lifestyles or the third world's lifestyles, or live by their own 10,000 commandments. Hypocrisy does indeed reign supreme. But enough beating up on Al Gore, even though he's such a big, juicy target. In all fairness, I must say Al Gore is right about one thing. Climate change is a huge moral issue. What's being done in the name of preventing climate change is immoral, lethal, and inhuman. A crime against humanity. Never forget that, and never let anybody else forget it either. Thank you.
Are we going to have questions?
So any questions?
Yeah, I share your concern for the poverty of the world. I've been in Mexico, Central America, South America, have close friends in Africa and Asia. And the need for abundant, affordable, reliable energy is very evident. The problem that I face, and maybe you have an answer for, is that when people live on a subsistence, and the people that I'm thinking of, I can see their faces, if electricity was nearly free, they still couldn't afford it. And for instance, in Africa, where our kids are, the government there is so corrupt that it takes everything basically that comes, and the people live on nothing. What else can we do besides providing affordable energy?
Well, let's go to your 2 points. Do them in reverse. Corruption is rampant over there. There's no doubt about it. Most of the money that goes there ends up in Swiss bank accounts and gets reinvested in some way or another back into Europe or the United States. And they have to deal with that corruption problem. My point is, we shouldn't add to that corruption problem by imposing layers of environmental ideologies that keep them from getting what they otherwise should have and could have. Now, as far as electricity costing money, it's the same here in the United States. It was never free in the United States, and we had a lot of poor people. I grew up 10 miles, less than that, from the first house in the world to be powered by hydroelectric. It's still there as a museum. My hometown, until a few years ago, got all of its electrical power from a hydroelectric plant. And we saw the TVA transform that part of southern United States into a thriving economy. People never got the power for free, but the power generates economic growth and development and jobs and opportunities and tremendous prosperity. Every kind of economic development under a good capitalist system, free market system, free enterprise system generates wealth that is unimaginable to people that have never had it. So it's there for the development, for the creation. They've got the minds, they've got the natural resources, they've got the work ethic. We just need to allow it to be freed and let them take charge of their futures, I think.
Thank you.
So if we can help them overcome some of these barriers to getting electricity, they will take it from there.